Another one of my main points is that I think Epstein's financial crimes are just as important as his sex crimes. And there's been a huge cover up, not just of the sex crimes, which is what people are focusing on, but even bigger is the cover up of his financial crimes. But what I was trying to get to is the fact that we're never going to get an open blanket admission from these intelligence agencies of their involvement with Epstein because of the reputational damage that would cause and perhaps, congressional scrutiny into their affairs.
In this eye-opening segment, Whitney Webb unpacks the real story behind Jeffrey Epstein's rise to power. She explains why Epstein's intelligence ties are almost impossible to prove directly, but the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. Webb details Epstein's early connections to elite networks, his mysterious hiring at Dalton, and the broader context of sex blackmail as a tool of control. This is essential viewing for anyone seeking to understand the true depth of the Epstein scandal.
How Trump ties into this broader network that I talk about in my book that involves Epstein and Maxwell and all of that. I wasn't trying to lay out necessarily Epstein's ties. But what I would say is that when we're talking about intelligence agencies, there's a few things to point out. So one is, in the case of Epstein, you're never going to get an affidavit signed by the CIA or Israeli intelligence that they had, ties with Epstein, at least not now. I mean, maybe 70 or 80 plus years from now, when everyone involved is dead, we may, get some sort of document release or something like that. But it's unlikely that they're going to just admit to it. Yeah, Epstein. I think he was, it's hard to know again, because it's not like they're going to come clean about it. But yeah, I think an asset is definitely fair to say at the very least. So I would say in the case of asset, it's someone that intelligence agencies can use, but you're not an agent. You're not necessarily sent on missions from a career operative perspective. But you have let your willingness to be used by a particular agency known, and that they utilize you when you receive some sort of either payment or something else in exchange for your services. Perhaps impunity from prosecution, right? Could be something else. So another one of my main points is that I think Epstein's financial crimes are just as important as his sex crimes. And there's been a huge cover up, not just of the sex crimes, which is what people are focusing on, but even bigger is the cover up of his financial crimes. But what I was trying to get to is the fact that we're never going to get an open blanket admission from these intelligence agencies of their involvement with Epstein because of the reputational damage that would cause and perhaps, congressional scrutiny into their affairs.
Webb reveals how Epstein's financial crimes have been overshadowed by his sex crimes, and why both are crucial to understanding the cover-up. She connects Epstein's story to a long history of elite sex blackmail operations, showing how these networks have shaped politics and business for decades.
The church committee in the 1970s, right? So instead, it's my job to compile all of these details. And when you look at how many of them there are and all together, it's very hard to write them off as coincidental. And what I just laid out on here, with Trump, which is just, a small segment of time we're talking about in his career, there's a lot of affiliations to mob figures and to figures like Maxwell or the Rothschilds that have some sort of state connection to Israel that are significant and should be considered, especially if Trump was bailed out by a particular banking interest and owes his career that followed to them, right? And it's worth pointing out, too, that in that same period of time, Maxwell was working on behalf of Rothschild interests in Wall Street. He was essentially sent from Britain to New York City, and Ghislaine Maxwell followed him to establish a foothold there. And he was doing, because that particular Rothschild bank had interests in doing mergers and acquisitions in Wall Street. And this is all in a New York Times article from the time, and that they had chosen Maxwell and a figure named Jimmy Goldsmith, who's a distant, or I don't know how distant, but a cousin of Rothschild's, who was also a known corporate raider of the 80s, to establish a foothold for them in New York by doing M&As. So it's also worth pointing out Goldsmith is probably the earliest figure in this network that has ties to Epstein, since Epstein was hanging out at his mansion in the early 70s when he was like not even employed at the Dalton School yet and was just like a college dropout that went backpacking to Britain and then came back, and then he's at Jimmy Goldsmith's house in New York. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. How did that happen? He was a high school, he graduated from high school. He was talented in apparently math and music. He got a scholarship to go to that Interlochen school where later he returns to abuse.
I went there one summer.
He went back there later and had his own cabin at Interlochen where he allegedly was trying to recruit victims and entice them with various things. So, people have posited that maybe he returned there because as a teen, when he himself attended, maybe he was abused there, which is, it's within the realm of possibility given how people with this type of, that engage in this type of behavior, usually they're abused themselves when they're young and then they offend as they're adults. He ends up not finishing college but when he's not finishing college, he goes backpacking through Europe, and in that trip, he somehow establishes a connection with the violinist of the royal family, and there's a lot of murkiness there. Her name was Jacqueline Dupree, and she later married an Israeli figure. I forget his name. I think he was a musician or something. But somehow they had some sort of connection there. And there's all this, these stories about him being a talented pianist during that period and what have you. But he later is hired at the Dalton School to teach math. And he's hired by William Barr's father, Donald Barr. He's not so. A lot of people have pointed out it doesn't make sense because I believe in New York public schools, you have to have a college degree in order to teach. So it was, didn't really make a lot of sense. But Donald Barr, his son at the time, William Barr, is already working for the CIA when Epstein is hired. He's specifically involved in stonewalling the church committee on behalf of the CIA. During that time in the late 70s. So it's possible that Epstein had some sort of connection then, because like I said, he's involved with this Jimmy Goldsmith guy by the time he comes back to New York. He's a pretty notorious corporate raider. He's a figure featured in the Adam Curtis documentary, The Mayfair Set, which includes a lot of figures that were tied up with Robert Maxwell. And they basically all tie back to this gambling den that was kind of ritzy called the Claremont Club, which was in London's Mayfair area. And a lot of those figures had ties to organized crime and also sex blackmail operations, some of which included the Profumo affair, which got basically brought down the British government at the time, and allegedly had ties to John F. Kennedy as well, that one of the women allegedly that was used to blackmail people by this group allegedly slept with Kennedy. And the FBI lost her client list, and a British Navy ship came to pick her up from the U.S. and take her back to the UK. And that was that. So, I know a lot of I originally set out to write a book about Epstein and then realized how this story about Epstein, as scandalous as it may seem to us now, has repeated itself many times throughout history. Yeah. And Roy Cohn, who I mentioned earlier, he was involved in some sort of sex blackmail ring that involved this liquor baron named Louis Rosenstiel. And it allegedly entrapped J. Edgar Hoover. And so some authors have posited that the reason Hoover never went after organized crime in the U.S. Was because he was basically blackmailed by the mob through this network that Roy Cohn and Rosenstiel were involved in, which operated out of the Plaza Hotel, which after Roy Cohn died, Donald Trump bought that.
To watch the full interview, check out the link in the description. Whitney Webb's research exposes the hidden power structures behind the Epstein scandal. She urges viewers to look beyond the headlines and recognize the systemic corruption at play. Share your thoughts. How deep do you think the cover-up goes? Subscribe for more investigative reporting. SIM swap fraud is sweeping the globe, and your mobile security is at risk. Switch to Ifani and lock out SIM swap fraud and get the most elite mobile protection in the world. Ifani guarantees 100% protection from SIM swaps backed by a $5 million insurance policy. Stay secure with reliable coverage, free international roaming, and unlimited data. Trust Ifani to keep your communications and assets secure. Get military-grade protection, 24/7 concierge service, and a hassle-free upgrade. Click the link below for $150 off. Thanks for watching. Help support this channel and receive exclusive offers from one of our partners located in the description. We'll see you on the next one.